All right, well, let me introduce. I've got an awesome guest with me today, and this is my podcast, Growing Money with Sean Trace. And can you tell me who you are, and my guests as well, who you are and what you do?
All right, so my name is Grace Liaw. The last name is Liaw. It's pronounced like meow, like a cat, but with an L. That's always an easy way for people to remember. I'm
That's
based in New York in the States, and the question is a very short one, but just tell the audience a bit about myself. But let me pick the parts that will kind of stick and be easy to remember. Based in New York, I live with my two grown sons. I like to say grown because it's important to emphasize these are not 5 and 10-year-olds. They are 31 and 26. We're three adults living in a small Queens apartment with our dog. So it's a very interesting living space. So even like where you see me right now, this is the only wall, the clean wall that we have in our apartment. About me, I grew up, I'm an American-born Chinese. My immigrant parents raised us here in New Jersey and New York area of the U.S. And so my professional background has always been education. I'm a certified teacher. I used to classroom teach little ones, specifically 9-year-olds, 9 and 10-year-olds. And I've actually stayed with education for my whole career in some way, shape, or form. And currently I work for an ed tech company, a virtual business school, and I'm on the engagement team, which I know is a really fuzzy term, but it's two major buckets. The work I do every day remotely is I support our international business students pretty much whatever they need online, but we also do, and we execute and design events to enrich their experience. And it's a lot of people work. So I would say education is the official profession that I'm in, but it's really at the end of the day about people. And okay, so I covered where I live, who I live with, and what I do every day. And important is, and I learned this for sure when I lived in China. I lived in Shanghai, China for 6-7 years. Warm water. You got to have warm water. That is warm. Yep. If you can handle hot, it's even better. But warm water is like the elixir of life. So I will close it off with that.
That's awesome. I actually, and I have many iterations of my professional life and career, and I studied Eastern medicine. Before I moved back to Asia, I took a leave of absence from my master's. I had like 8 months left in my acupuncture and Eastern medicine degree. And yeah, always warm water, never cold is a big thing in the tradition. It's a big deal. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, we had been talking, and one of the reasons that I wanted to bring you on and chat with you is because we had talked a little bit about networking. Because one of the things that you are quite good at is networking and the ability to kind of bring people together. And I think that there's this great book, and if you've never read it, it's phenomenal. It's by a guy named Eric Barker, Barking Up the Wrong Tree. It's a phenomenal book. And he talks about, there's one chapter on the importance of networking, and he was talking, because the whole book looks at very scientifically the key components of success. And he looks at, introverts versus extroverts. And he talks about how there are some very successful networkers. And one of the things that there's this one guy in the Silicon Valley that he referenced, and this person, everyone knows them. And this person is a person who helps out everyone. And they just bring people together and are a unifying force. And it just, that's always stood out, because some of the best things that have happened in my life have been brought about by not chance, but by the help or assistance of someone else. And there's just this synergy there that we all bring together, but you have to be willing to network. And there is a degree of people still have a look at that word in a negative light, networking, but yet there is something really awesome about it. Talk to me about it and your experience with this.
All right. Love this topic, and I can talk about it for days. So I'll start with the last thing that you said, which I for sure have observed to be true, especially working in a business school where everyone's getting a business degree for just a couple of main reasons. One is, I mean, at least everyone says so. It's like to grow my network. I want to know more people,
Yeah.
and then obviously to advance their career and to learn, of course. So it's, I wouldn't say it's a dirty word, but it definitely, once you hear it, you're like, ugh, like, you know, some people, I think inside they're like rolling their eyes like, oh God, I have to network. Or some people are like, yeah, I, I definitely want to have a larger network, or I want to network, but then also don't know what to do with that. So I think it's kind of a vague term in some ways. It just generally means knowing more people. But I was thinking about last night, I was thinking, okay, well, what does it really mean? And, you know, what function
Right.
does it serve? Because it's, whether you like people or not, I think that's another thing. You have to have an honest conversation with yourself. Like, well, how do I feel about people? Am I going to, do I
Right.
want to know people because I'm interested in them? Or do I want to know them because I need them? Or I need to, um, leverage is used so much in the business world. Like, yeah, leverage this, you know, you gotta leverage that. I think we can get lost in what that means, and I think the word networking kind of has become that, where it feels like, oh, I have to. And I'm willing to guess that, first of all, having an honest conversation with oneself, like, what does it mean to me? I don't need to be someone else. Like, the person you were talking about in this book, which I did jot down, by the way, we are all different, and we will all, I think, have our own flavor of what that means. And that's
Yeah.
totally okay. I think that's important to kind of embrace. I just happen to be wired. I think I was just born this way. I don't mind. I like people. I just genuinely, I don't think I get up in the morning and think like, yeah, like how many people am I going to get to know today? I'm just more like, oh, who are you? And that's always been that way for me since I was really young. I will talk to. I did all the things that parents don't want you to do, which is to talk to strangers. I would be willing to talk to strangers, and not so much that I thought, oh, I want to have a conversation. I would just think, you know, I'd be just curious. So maybe curiosity is one key component to networking, knowing yourself, being curious. For me, it's quite natural, but I know it's not. It's not the first instinct for a lot of people, and it could be something to work on for
Yeah.
an individual. But so that there's the kind of knowing yourself, being honest, realizing that curiosity makes it actually a lot easier. It doesn't feel like a chore when you start to be curious. And that's why children are so wonderful, because children are just kind of born
Yeah.
curious to some degree, and some more than others. But there's
Yeah.
always that minimal baseline of, wait, what is this world that I'm in? What is that? And I think for those of us who are comfortable networking, we probably had it in spades when we were
Yeah.
babies, and then it just kind of stayed with us. So the curiosity factor, and then um, I'm thinking also of a book that I think many of us probably know, Malcolm Gladwell, his book Tipping Point.
Oh, it's a
That
great
was
book.
one of the first books I read. Yeah, I still think about it actually. It was so impactful because his book was one of the first that I read, and I don't read a ton of books, but I do read some books. Um, his book about just social epidemics, or how things happen across a lot of people. And when he talks about the different types of people, there were, I think, mavens who are just experts in what they do, connectors. Connectors
Yeah.
really falls in that category of people who network well, or just generally do relationships well. They just have this generosity and capacity to remember people, to think of people, to go the extra little mile for people. You had mentioned something just when you're sharing that at different times in your life, people have crossed paths with you and probably helped you out or offered something or shared something really important that you were able to take advantage of. Those connectors, they are like next level. I guess you can call them networkers, but they're just at their core. They just have this beacon and this radar for human beings, and so they naturally become expert networkers because of who they are. I would like to think that their intention was not like, I need to get to know as many people as I can in my lifetime. I feel like that would actually change the whole vibe. I feel like that's just who they are. And so even thinking about them being inspired by that, whether you are not a people person or you're kind of a people person, I think is something that has always stuck with me. I'm like, oh, I would love to be that and to be seen as someone
Yeah.
who people appreciate as, she remembered my name, or she, sent me a nice little note, kind of like those little moments. I think would be really cool to be seen as, and therefore naturally someone that they would want to network with. So I'll stop. I'll pause here for now. That's kind of where my stream of consciousness has brought me to.
I love it. There's also a degree of like magic that I find that pops up, because for me, one of the things that I find is that when I'm networking with people, I'm often finding myself amazed by how we fit together, like how this person and and one of the things that I love to do is I love seeing the potential in people, in our relationship, and that's one of the things too. Like when I meet someone, I had a young man on my podcast the other day, really cool kid, and he's this amazing artist, and we were discussing things, and I had done my research. I always do my research on guests, but there was part that I didn't find out until we were in the interview. And then I had been writing this movie for a long time. In the middle of the thing, he's like, I've always wanted to be an actor, but I've never been able to. And I have this script that my friend and I are going to be shooting this springtime. And we had this one 20-something character that we needed to find the right person for. And then he was like, and then I was like, dude, we got to talk about this role. And he's all about it. And I shared the movie concept with him, and he's like, I would love to be part of that. And it just fell into place. And like, as we're talking, I was like, this is the right person for this. And it was part of it was that I could see his potential, and he was able to see my potential. And I think that that's part of it as well, is that networking is not just, because I think when people do it, I had someone message me on LinkedIn the other day, and it was just very much like, what can you do for me? You know what I mean? It was that type of vibe. Yeah. And I felt it, and I just didn't feel right. Versus I've had people approach me, and they see my potential, and they know what their potential is, and maybe what the potential we could have together. And that's this again, going back to that fun, I mean, we haven't said it in this, but that word synergy, where it's not just about what you can accomplish and how someone can help you, but yet maybe about the things that you can create together. And maybe it's not even creating a business or something together, but it's maybe creating a larger network. Maybe you create a group of people that communicates. Maybe you share them with your core friend group, and by doing so, you raise the whole vibration of your group of friends up to this place where you guys are able to kind of access a next level thing. Like, imagine that, and this is one of the reasons I went back and I'm doing my degree. Part of it was I grew up with really awesome parents, but I received no financial education, no business education. And I've been trying to run my own business, and I just kept feeling like I'm running my head into the wall, and then I'm getting this information. I feel like I'm able to operate on this next level, and I'm meeting these people that are doing the same. And I think that's this idea of synergy and leveling up that can only happen by meeting people that are in that place and doing what you're doing or what you want to be doing. I love your perspective on that.
I love that. And I love your perspective on this because we're just going to keep expanding this. I feel it. So,
Yeah.
um, something you said that was a couple of things that you said that really kind of is sticking with me and resonating. Um, it's the idea, the potential part, and the possibility that you can't possibly know or see until you start a conversation. So for me, it's just starting a conversation. That's why I was telling you offline, I'm like, I'll talk about anything. Just,
Right.
I
Me
will
too.
comment on anything. And because through the conversation, like stuff will emerge that we may not have intentionally looked for, but then it's like, oh, that's a thing for you. Well, guess what? I have this here, and that dot connecting. So for me, if there was a couple of taglines for me, and I didn't realize any of this about myself honestly until till recent years. There, you know how you kind of always kind of operate in life a certain way. You're like, yeah, this is who I am, but I can't articulate it. I'm only
Yeah.
now really able to fully articulate that I am about people. I knew that, but I'm definitely a dot connector. So I completely resonate with Malcolm Gladwell's connector persona that he talks about, because I think connecting dots is someone who sees possibilities. And I for sure, you are the same in that regard, and starting conversations, and they are part of each other, because you can't connect a dot if you don't start a conversation. And you and I probably have realized enough conversations have happened in our lives where, oh, I knew that, and that happened because we sat down, because we messaged each other. And authenticity is a thread that has to exist through all of that in order for the really good things to happen. So
Yeah.
imagine if I wouldn't say all of us, but I think if there are enough people, even in our circles, who just realize that principle, if there's a way to shape it into another Malcolm Gladwell concept, except it's ours.
Yeah.
The importance of dot connecting, the importance of seeing the possibility, even if you don't see the possibility, and then the delight that comes from, oh, we're going to fill, so and so is going to fill this need that I've always had, or
Yes.
I get to
Yes.
do something, right?
And
I
that's the
see your
magic.
finger going. So that means, what are you hearing?
That's the
And
magic.
let's keep going with this. Yeah, what's the
No,
magic?
but that's the magic. That's the magic. The idea of
Yeah.
um, you are sitting there in this conversation, and suddenly something clicks, and you sit there. My friend Tim graduated from the school that I'm studying at, where you work, and Tim was like,
Okay.
I'm going through this huge shift, and then when he started describing what he was learning, I was like, I need that. I need that. And that was the connection that happened. And then that popped me over here, and then I found this network and this group. And it might simply be that there is this unfolding, and that's like a beautiful Eastern philosophy image of the unfolding of the lotus, and that there are these layers of things that happen that you get to. And can you go down the rabbit hole, if we want to take an Alice in Wonderland reference? Are you willing to kind of run? Because there is, and I'm a big believer that there is a magic to life, and I think that it's up to us to kind of to run with that, and to see, because I think every single person that we interact with, they have some type of beautiful experience that we can learn from. Are we able to sit
100%.
and listen and give them the time to tell their story, and then we go, that's it. That's why you popped into my life.
That's why, yeah, the magic you talk about, which maybe is a great way to kind of capture all of these elements, because I think it definitely is a recipe of multiple things needing to happen in order for that synergistic moment to happen, because it doesn't happen with everyone. We'll meet lots of people and have lots of conversations, and they are, acquaintances and great, but just, there may not be a rabbit hole to go down necessarily, or we just kind of put a pin in it. I've had that experience too, where you meet people and it later, sometimes much later, it's like, oh, let me go back and chat with that person because something comes up. But you mentioned story. I am I wholeheartedly and know that everyone has not just one story, but multiple stories. And so it's so vital. And maybe because I'm getting older. I listened to one of your podcasts, one of your, Bill Brown, I can't remember his name.
With Bill Brown on
He
my
was
Sean
talking
Chase show,
about
yeah.
for 40 something and talking
Yep.
about helping people in life, basically second half of life. But for sure, in the maturing of us as individuals, pausing and stopping and listening to stories, and also having a chance to tell our own is really important. It's not just
Yeah.
fun. It's actually, I think, pretty critical. And it's both to listen and hear, but it's also to be able to tell. So I'm actually super grateful that you asked me, because I basically get to tell little chunks of my story. That's very powerful. And the also part of the magic, the storytelling element, the connecting of the dots, the seeing of potential and possibilities, and then authenticity, which I mentioned earlier. That is where the right people find each other, because
Yeah.
you had mentioned, someone hits you up, and clearly just wanted something from you. That one may not be, the kind of dot that we need,
Yeah.
but the right ones, those are ones that they're gold, and you almost
Yeah.
never know what's going to happen.
And to
Yeah.
be fair, I have to make sure that I don't close the door on those people that might seem like they just want, because there might be something there. I have to give permission to it, and see, that's the other side. It's like you have to be open,
That's
and I think that's an important one. Now, let me ask you this. What advice would you give someone who's looking to expand their network beyond their current circle of contacts? What would you say to someone who's
Okay.
trying to grow beyond their circle?
Okay. It's like you read my mind, or I was thinking about a few weeks, wasn't a few weeks ago, maybe like a month ago, the term cross pollination came up in
Oh,
conversation. I think we were in an internal meeting at work and talking about marketing, actually, I think. And the term cross pollination, like, cross pollinating purposes or something like that. It wasn't a conversation about networking, but the word stood out. I was like, oh yeah, cool. Let me think about that. And then it came up again in another completely separate conversation, where I was talking to individuals about potential events and getting individuals who normally are not in the same space together for an interesting event and conversation. So that kind of just started that seed started to kind of take life in my brain. I'm like, oh, right. We are naturally going to default to our own communities, the people that we are similar to us, and speak our languages, literally and figuratively. If I'm a teacher, I can hang with the teachers all day. It's no
yeah,
problem. But the there is a point where that's going to be limiting, and it's not because there aren't enough
yeah,
people within your expertise or industry. There are plenty of people, but there's still a cognitive and social boundary that is there. So getting out of that and starting to talk to people not in your industry, not of your culture, um, anything different, it starts to create possibilities of cross pollination, which is the idea of basically the birds and the bees and the moving pollen from one flower to another one in order for life to continue to grow.
yeah,
And I love that metaphor for us, because that is the laws of nature do apply to us as well. We will be stronger, we will be more diverse, we will be more interesting if we start to have conversations with people who are different, but at the same time not, because you start to realize, oh, wait, we're both interested in sustainability. You're in media, I'm in education. What can we do with that? And so so back to the question that you asked, what advice or encouragement is to start exploring out of your network. And some people are like, well, I mean, I work in this company, which is another limiting, very easily
Yeah.
limiting proximity thing. We kind of just stay with people we work with because we're talking to them all day. We kind of feel like our body's been networking, but we actually haven't been. We've just been talking to our internal teams. Um, think about where you might have met people or been introduced to people not in your social circle, not in your work circle. And if you really want to take another step, then put yourself into situations. Go to a conference that
Yeah.
you maybe normally wouldn't go to, or if you're at a conference, be cognizant that this is my chance to meet people different. So then it creates an opportunity to potentially cross-pollinate, and I think that just starts to take a life of its own. I think I do it subconsciously, but now that I'm aware of it, I'm like, okay, cross-pollination could be really important. I am actually paying more attention to it. So that was a really long-winded
No, that was
response,
awesome.
but cross-pollinate.
There was an idea that plays in with that of circles, like all of these different
Mm.
circles, and this is something that I've become more aware of with this podcast and with my other podcast. As I look for guests, one of the things that I'll do is sometimes I'll just go down a rabbit hole, and I will think about what type of guest do I want. Like one of the things that I'm still trying to seek out right now for my Sean Trey show, my other podcast that's more on like personal betterment and just looking at meeting people from interesting walks of life. I really want to interview someone who rides. It's like a bull rider, like a rodeo bull rider, and
Yeah.
the idea being, like, think about that. Someone who wakes up in the morning going, I'm going to strap myself to something the size of a Honda Civic that has a mind and is angry and wants me to get me off of it, and all I'm held on with is a rope. Like, what,
Yeah.
what, how do you process that? How does that, what is that like? And so as I started looking on Instagram and other places for, searching out the hashtag rodeo, a bull rider, and then just seeing all of these professional people, seeing the whole world that was built up around that, the photographers, the people that are contestants, the people that do like accessories, the whole business world that exists around this one thing. You could do something like hashtag flamenco guitar, and there's this whole world around that. We don't realize that there are these deep circles, and yet that is the current state of the world. Our current technological world, the algorithms focus on these circles. That's what a hashtag is. It's this bubble that exists around a concept. And for me, I'm just absolutely fascinated by, we have the ability to jump into these other areas because social media can be very limiting. It keeps us in the bubble that we've kind of been in. But that's one of the reasons that I'm still deeply fascinated by keywords and hashtags and just our ability to jump into another world. After I met, I did an interview with a couple extreme sports guys. And then after that, like, I started having these extreme sport people start following my podcast. And I'm like, I'm definitely not an extreme sports person because I'm like, seriously, like, I wake up in the day and like, I ride motorcycles, and that's what we do in Southeast Asia. But beyond that, I'm not very extreme. I wish I was. Gosh, I would love to be, the skydiving guy or something else like that. But I thought it was pretty wild that I was wearing my pink, Star Wars sweatshirt underneath. That's pretty extreme for me, I'm not that wild guy. But like, we have the ability through one simple connection to dive into a whole other world. But it takes the courage to try.
Yes. Okay. Okay. I'm loving this. Couple things there. The fact that they started following you, I think, is really cool too. And that actually really speaks to the fact that at the end of the day, we're all humans, like
Yeah.
literally every single one of us. So we will always share actually multiple points of commonality. Maybe not the expertise parts, if they're extreme sports or extreme athletes, and you, Sean, are this, I feel like you have multiple possibilities, but you are a community creator, you're a content
Mhm.
creator, you're a media expert, um, but you're interesting to someone, and also you entered their world for a little bit, like, hey, like he kind of hung out in our space, so let me see what
Yeah.
he's doing as well. And that's so powerful. And then what you were talking about earlier, which is you've basically started to gain knowledge because you started to do your research. You literally needed to understand a little bit more about what your guest will is all about. And I think that's what I love about the idea of podcast or hosting a show or doing
Yeah.
interviews, which I get to do a lot in the work that I get to do. I'm like, oh, I get to hang in that space for a little bit, even if it's just for one conversation.
Yes.
I'm learning knowledge, but I'm also starting to pick up on their language. Language is another thing that really kind of is always in the back of my mind. We may, like you and I speak English for sure, but we also speak our own unique languages based on our
Yes.
expertise and where we're living and what you're studying. So you're in the
Yes.
business school that I work in. So anyone in Quantic is speaking a certain language with each other. So
Yep.
the bullfighters, they're speaking their language as well. And so by doing
Yep.
the things that you're doing and being courageous for that one step, to have that conversation, to ask that question, like, hey, would you want to talk to me? Then you're starting to at least open yourself to learn some of their language, and people then trust happens. A little bit of
Yeah.
trust. I think that's maybe what some of this is also. There's some kind of necessity for an initial starting point with trust, which leads
Yes.
to all those things that we were talking about. We're kind of working backwards right now. We're kind of going from like, this is networking, and this is where it actually starts. So I don't know. What do you think about that aspect? Like, what have you learned in all these interactions that you've had building your podcast and your projects? What have you learned about connections and trust? That's me asking you now.
What value can I add? And I think
Mm,
and that's something that you had said, hey, I would love to chat with you about podcasts. And I said in our conversation before this, I'm happy to share any bit of knowledge I have, because
yes.
that's a gift I can give to someone, and then there's so many times that I was working where I had one guy who was an expert on, he's doing horseshoes, and he's like the biggest horseshoeing guy on TikTok, like Brett Malpin, and he does all of the horseshoe videos where he shows them trimming the hoof on the horse and then putting the
I
horseshoe
think
on.
I've seen it. It came
Yeah,
up on my
they're
feed. I was
so
riveted.
they're so popular, right? And so when I met him, he did not. He is a farrier. That's the name of the job, and that's what he did. And he knew nothing
Yeah.
about media. And then he suddenly is now dealing with millions of followers, and he's like, I don't know what I'm doing. And so when we finished up,
Yeah.
and he's like, how can I grow this thing? What would you recommend? And so I started talking about, I said, I would start looking at not just doing these videos, but also looking at branching out into video
Mm,
blogs where you show your life, where you start showing what it's like to be in the
yeah.
day in the life of a farrier, or cowboy lifestyle, or whatever it is, horsemanship, these different things to look
Mm-hmm.
at branching out. And that was something I was able to give to him. And and he
Mm-hmm.
gave me his time, which, for a person who has a podcast, someone's time and information is a huge gift, because that's then the gift I
Mm-hmm.
give to my listeners. And you don't,
Mm,
sometimes some of these early episodes in a podcast, as you go and build things, you don't get the views, and you're like, oh man. But then my other podcast, I'll get these weekly announcements
Yeah.
that people just circle back on content that I had forgotten about, that suddenly is like, wow, this episode's now blowing up, and you don't even recognize it at the time because you're still giving it. And that is where that trust comes in. As you build the network, you have to be willing to give people something truthful, something authentic, something genuine. And I think that's a starting point, is first of all, identifying if you, and this is advice for someone who wants to network, what do you have to offer? What are you bringing to the table? What is it about you that no one else is able to provide? Because once you know yourself, you know the value that you have. And sometimes we don't know the value. We don't know what we're good at. We might feel invalidated. We might feel stuck. Or maybe you feel insignificant crossing into this new territory. If I'm speaking with a bunch of, C-level executives, there's going to be a little bit of intimidation that I have on some levels, but they're not black belts in judo. They don't know how to ride a motorcycle in Saigon traffic. They can't speak Vietnamese, and I can. And those are things that I have, that are my skill set, that make me unique and special. And I think that if I can recognize that and own that, and then they might have a need for that. And that's important.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yes, it's true. Maybe this ties into the courage part, because going into conversations or going into unfamiliar territory does require at least an ounce of courage. For me, it was probably stupidity. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. Let's just go and do it. But the courage part, and maybe even you articulated so well, but it maybe subconsciously, and maybe for sure should be consciously, to be courageous means you feel safe with yourself, or you feel confident enough in yourself, or at least sure enough that I'm worthy and valuable to have any conversation I want to have, even if it's with someone and something that is not familiar to me. Let me go in with courage and authenticity and a generous heart, and see where it goes. I think you're right. Something you said earlier, that a lot of us actually don't know we haven't really sat down and thought about, what am I good at? What are the things that are my superpowers and my strengths? And we can be vague about it. Like, oh yeah, I have a sense of humor, or I have, that's not really it. It's more like those very specific things that you're in the zone of brilliance for, which I heard recently as a term. I'm like, oh, that's a really cool way to describe whatever our talents are. Maybe, maybe I'm not great with numbers. Like our students in our business program, when they hit accounting, they're like, yeah, that is not my zone of brilliance. And I feel very not confident there. But that's okay, because you have a zone of brilliance in something else. And for me, probably it is something to do with people. There's something about, I am very confident when it comes to carrying a conversation with someone, even if it's someone I don't know, and I don't mind doing it. So that could be one of mine. I could talk about drinking warm water all day. I don't know if it's a brilliant thing, but I could talk about it all day. But yes,
there is a gift to that.
I'm resonating with what you're sharing.
To pull the string out of something, to continue. Like, I remember we have a similarity. Early in my career, for many, many years, I taught children. I taught English overseas. And so I taught, 9 to 13-year-olds for, maybe 15 years. And there is something to be said for, like, covering a lesson. Your own students, you have your lessons prepared, you know what you're doing. But when you cover and you go in, people do not understand. It's I try to explain it like going into a stand-up comedian going into the most difficult venue that they've ever been in, with very critical guests, that are sitting there judging you, because you will be judged by little kids. I remember one kid once I had a lesson plan. I went up and the kid was like, "This is not fun," and I'm just like, okay.
I'm sorry.
To do right now. Sorry about that. But there's a superpower in being able to just improvise on the spot and to be able to like, we are going to shift gears. And this is something that I found with teaching, not necessarily networking, but it is a networking thing. Sometimes you have to pivot and pivot fast. You know, like, and this is something because I kind of view my podcast as a supercharged networking as well. And there are guests that I will prep for. I will have a great set of questions and I am going down that. And then I fall flat. And then I just have to pivot and go, what is it that we can relate on? Because there is going to be something. Are you willing to find it? Are you willing to look at it? And again, and that's my superpower is I dig.
Yeah. I love that you talked about teaching, and this is going to be also a shout out to just teachers in general. So if anyone's listening to this and they've either taught at some point or are an educator, teachers in general, they have so much talent for pivoting, for being creative, just when you think you can't think of another way to grab someone's attention, because that's what teaching is. It's actually, yes, it's the content, but it's about holding the attention of the audience, whether they are, 3-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 40-year-olds. It's the engagement part where a teacher, facilitator, anyone, that dynamic is no joke. It is, and it's on the spot. You have to think on your feet. So, but classroom teachers of young children, for sure, they are an entire one-man, one-woman production from beginning to end, because it doesn't stop. As soon as the kids walk in, you are on until they leave. And there is no taking breaks. There's no... Exactly. And you're right. They are the toughest critics in the sense that they are genuine and they are like, that's not right. And we actually need that. So they are a very powerful mirror to us children, than probably many other things in life. And so I know it's terrifying for some people. I've actually heard people say, I could never teach children. Like they would be frightened. But those of us who have taught children, we obviously know it is hard, but it's also one of the most amazing experiences and human sharpening processes I've ever actually had. So a lot of what I do now came from my classroom experiences with children. Actually, there are very transferable skills into networking as well with adults.
Yes.
So I'm really glad you talked about that. Actually,
one of the things that I found with children as they grow and they become teenagers and we move into adulthood, little kids are the experts in networking. They will go around and they bring value. And you can see it. Like, do you know the kid? I have one kid who's an expert networker in my class, and I have one kid and some kids who fall flat. And that kid who's the expert networker, he always comes with Oreos. And he'll walk up and be like, how's it going? I'm good. It's nice to see you. Can I look at your homework? I've got an Oreo. I'd love to check my homework with you. Thank you for the Oreo. He brings value, and then he's never fake. He's always got the Oreos. And I ask him, I was like, Ryan, why do you always bring Oreos? I like to share with my friends. And my daughter is 7, and she always loves to load up on the candy to share. We get older, and you see it with teenagers when children switch into adolescence and they start becoming more self-aware. There's also this shyness that enters in, and one of the places that I see it the most is with older people and business people. We think we are more confident because we're older and we're adults, but actually we're much more closed off. Many adults operate in their circle. There was a great Ryan Reynolds movie called Free Guy. I loved it.
I love that movie. That was a good movie.
And one of the things I love in Free Guy is when he is getting his cup of coffee and he wants to order something different. And he's like, can I get a, and like everyone's like, what is that? You're ordering something different? And that's kind of the idea too, is I feel like that's kind of what so many people are like when they feel like they're stepping out of their comfort zone. But the only way to really, and this is, I love this, the only way to really achieve your personal greatness is on the other side of your discomfort.
Yeah. Ooh, that's very quotable. Can you say that again? The only way to
achieve your personal greatness is on the other side of your discomfort. Maybe I'm slaughtering my own quote right now.
Sorry, I'm thinking about it. What would be discomfort for you? This feels comfortable, I think, for you. But what would be?
This feels comfortable.
I'm thinking about mine too.
Going through the growing stages of growing my company. The money side, the financial side, the accounting side. That was terrifying for me. Going through accounting was terrifying. And in looking at that, because I'm good at networking. My dad is the greatest networker that ever lived. My father is like grandmaster. Super. Okay. And but it was always like, if we saw someone who's broken down on the side of the road, my father would pull over and he would help. And that was what he came with. Everyone would say, Al Trace, of course I know Al Trace. He's a great guy. He knows everyone. And he always brought value. And that was where, that was my role model growing up for networking. But yet what made me uncomfortable is how to apply those skills, how to monetize stuff, how to grow it. And so, I think that you look at what you're good at and you see, but I think also coming back to our networking, I've had great people as I've expanded my network who give me courage to look at those areas that I'm afraid of. Because
I love that.
Sometimes all we have to do is shine a light into the darkness. Those monsters that are in our mind, those monsters that are existing in our heads are often not as scary in real life once you shine a light on them. At least that's my perspective.
So I think that's actually a wonderful visual. First of all, I need word pictures. I don't know if it comes from my teaching days or just how I am as a person, but wherever someone like yourself can give me a word picture or a metaphor, that just stays with me. And I remember that moment and the idea so much longer. The shining of the light on things that feel uncomfortable, hard, stressful, all those things. If you shine a light on your own, for instance, being transparent about what's difficult, what's challenging, like, hey, I'm going through this journey and here's what's happening, that then encourages people to either shine it on their own or share it. And then once that, and this is maybe the trust thing, the connection thing, then you're like, oh, I'm not alone. And the idea of not being alone is critical. And I think maybe that's what network's actually really about. Networking maybe is not about just more people. It's that I'm not alone. And I'm not only not alone, but I can share things and do things with others. That's like bonus. To me, it's bonus to know that, maybe you and I can do something together. But it first starts with, hey, let's hang for a little bit and see what like literally get to know each other. And getting to know each other, having conversations. I'm learning more about you, what you're shining your lights on, and then your light is amazing that way too. I'm definitely not a science person. Physics was not a good subject for me, but I'm pretty sure light definitely spreads.
Yeah.
So if there's a light happening in a moment or a conversation, it's naturally also going to shine light to where I am as well. And I think that's actually really, really cool. So I love that. Networking is so much more than just the word that we see.
Well, and I feel like the light can be contagious if we can spread it, and
Mm,
it sparks something in someone else that I think is really important.
yeah, yeah.
And I think it's so important to see how we can help other people find their light. You know what I mean? Because it's like they've got it in them,
Mm,
and if we really try, we can help people see this bigger thing. And I think that's part of the beauty. Now let me circle back on this for you. I always like to ask this question on my other podcast, and I'll ask you here now, just because I'm getting to know
okay.
you. If you could go back in time and give yourself some advice earlier in your life, what advice would you give yourself?
Oh man, it's, I have to think about that for a second. Okay, going back in my, like some of the ones are obvious. It's like why'd you do that for? Like those kinds of things. But but now I'm also of a different mindset. Like, you know what? Even the hard things that I've had to pass through, they were probably necessary for me to be where I am now. But what advice would I give myself? I mm, I think I would give myself advice in the area of relationships, even though it's something I'm already generally very comfortable with. I have three siblings. I'm the oldest of four children, and so there's Dave, Joe, and Dorothy, my younger siblings, and there's like a 12-year gap between myself and the youngest. And so there's like we're a small army, and I think what I didn't do well or didn't really appreciate were my relations, my time with my siblings when we were growing up. I was too self-consumed. I was a teenager. I was, only care about me really. And I think the advice would be, um, just pay attention a little bit to your younger siblings who at the time needed me in the sense that I was the oldest, and so I did a lot of the care for my younger siblings. I was, you know, they my younger brother followed me around all the time, and I just found him annoying. So it's pretty simple, but just cherish. Maybe not even as far as cherish, but just while you're hanging out with your younger siblings, just be nice, be kind, and because now we're all adults and we get along fine, we get along pretty well. But I think I missed some opportunities when I was young as the oldest sibling to kind of be more than just the caretaker, but to actually build relationships with my siblings. That might be a lot to ask a young person because young people we don't always get that. But maybe if there was a way for me to tell my teenage self, pay more attention to your siblings and it'll be worth it in the long run.